One of my favorite things about retro gaming is discovering incredible new games that I'd never heard of, and then being blown away by how good they are. Not just arcade games, but old console and computer games too. Games that are so good, yet somehow fell through the cracks and ended up lost to time. Often never ported from arcade, or stuck as console exclusives forever. All of the games in this video were a joy for me to discover, and they run the gamut across all systems and formats. You'll even see must-plays for the PC-98 and MSX computers, as well as the best PC-DOS shooting game ever made, and yet almost nobody's heard of it. So I made this video to help you discover some of these games like I did, and absolutely guaranteed you're going to want to play some of these. So without further ado, 10 obscure, rare, or simply forgotten action and shooting games that you've possibly never heard of, but absolutely need to play. RIOT is the most batshit insane action shooting game in existence. What other game has you dodge rolling atop a speeding train, mowing down foot soldiers from the Temple of Doom, while Kevin Bacon, hair slowly whipping in the wind, lobs grenades at you from the foreground, right before you fall through the roof to fight a vest-wearing circus gorilla, then kill some more Kevin Bacon, before ending up in a gangster boss room with a Hermes ripoff lounging at his desk, and a disfigured, demonic mass of art hanging on the wall. If you guessed that you'd be suddenly transported into outer space to fight him and his gargoyle mooks, you'd be right. And that's just stage 2. That's after you do battle with Baby Yoda Uber Demon on stage 1. What's wild is RIOT was developed by NMK, the company behind excellent yet obscure shooters like Gunnail, Saint Dragon, the Thunder Dragon games, Zblade on Neo Geo, and more. Yet here they are, pulling out all the stops in a completely different genre, not just beating the competition to death, but well beyond into absurdity. The coolest gimmick in the game, and one that actually works, is the added foreground enemies coming in from behind you, forcing you to turn around and manage an additional plane of enemies. It also just adds a real cool factor to the visuals and action, as if there wasn't already enough going on. NAM 75 on Neo Geo is an old nostalgic favorite of mine, and I love a good scrolling gallery shooter, so finding RIOT was like discovering a hidden pot of gold. In fact, leprechauns are probably the only thing the game's missing, as it's got everything else. You'd think I'm kidding, but the first level literally goes from being a war zone to you falling through the sky into a jungle, hitting tree branches on the way down, mind you, cause why not? Landing headfirst into a shallow river without a hint of injury, battling through the jungle, getting pushed over a waterfall by a hovercraft, hitting some more tree branches, cause why not? Then landing face first onto the hard ground, to find yourself in what looks like the Temple of Doom. The devs really loved Indiana Jones, you think? And yes, to end up fighting the Yoda spawn of Satan. The stage from inside your chopper is another standout, as the horizon constantly shifts perspectives, even facing downward as you magically cling to the ground, unaffected by gravity. The thing is, the gameplay here is totally solid, with 3 buttons to fire forward, backward, or roll, and you can even cancel out of a roll by pressing the opposite direction. Slightly clunky, as sometimes you'll want to move your reticle, but doing so during a roll could cancel it, so it takes some getting used to. But the idea of shooting behind you feels natural and works perfect, really adding to the game. Just make sure you use auto-fire, as it doesn't have it by default, and playing without it in this game? Nope. I'd love to try it 2-player one day, as having one person focus on the foreground, while another the background would be pretty trick. You even get some nonsensical, funny story sequences, with the usual great English, to entertain between levels. RIOT feels satisfying to play, and it isn't a case of all flash and no substance. And if you're a fan of NMK's other games, or not, this one's a rare bird that's definitely worth a fly, and 100% Kevin Bacon approved. Guardians isn't just the best beat 'em up you've likely never played. It's one of the best damn beat 'em ups ever made. period, as it takes every aspect that I normally find slow and repetitive about beat-em-ups, and wipes the floor with them. Everything about Guardians is fast, with a huge variety of moves and abilities, making it thrilling to experiment and discover all you can do. The moveset is absolutely insane, and makes just about all other beat-em-ups pale in comparison. Instead of just dashing back and forth, you can also double tap up or down to quickly flip in that direction to avoid hits or get in front of an enemy. Instead of just a typical attack combo, you can hold up, down, or forward for different types. Some flashier and more damaging, while others quick and dirty to get in some hits and quickly move to avoid an attack. You can attack while running, jumping, or grabbing an enemy, and if you hold the attack button, you can actually block. Oh, and if you want to counter an attack, hit forward while blocking at the right moment. No matter what you want to do, the game's got you covered. But we're just getting started. Want to hit someone behind you? Quickly tap B then A and nail them without turning around. You can even jump backwards without turning around by hitting B then jump. Want to get across the screen quickly? Jump and backflip your way across. And when you get knocked down, instead of just getting back up, you can hold a direction to do a quick up or down dash to get out of the way. Or better yet, mash a button and wiggle the joystick to get up with a rising attack that'll knock down most enemies around you. We're already so far beyond most beat-em-ups, it's pathetic. And I haven't even mentioned all the special moves and power gauge. Long-range attacks that hit a bunch of enemies in a horizontal line, powerful jumping attacks, special throws when grabbing that do extra damage, and even specials depending on weapons that you've picked up. And those are the generic ones for all the characters. On top of that, each of the 8, yes, count them, 8 different characters you can choose, have their own additional set of special moves on top of that, their own types of combos, grabs, jumping moves, and more, and their unique specials. There are fighting games out there that wish they had this kind of moveset. It's just batshit insane, and I love it. You don't just want to try playing with every different character. You're almost compelled to see all the different kick-ass moves and specials that you can pull off. Guardians gives you all the tools necessary to clear the game. Now, your more powerful moves all take a portion of your power gauge, so you can't use them endlessly, but it recharges as you beat up enemies. Stand still for a moment and you auto-recharge as well. And if you use a power move without having enough to use it, you execute an overcharge, which still pulls off the move and restores your gauge, but at the cost of a life bar. I'm still scratching the surface of how many mechanics this game has. Many I'm sure that I've yet to figure out. Once you've played a beat 'em up with this much depth, it's really hard to go back. And we haven't even talked about the incredible graphics and art design, rivaling some of the best that we've seen out of greats like Capcom and Konami. Every stage and background is just teeming with details that you'll discover the more you play. Every stage is set piece after set piece. The character sprites are all huge, and the enemy designs remain super creative across all the levels. And as you progress, 3 or 4 of the levels can actually be chosen, so you can take different routes through the game to change it up. What doesn't this game have? Well, I guess it doesn't have boobs. Wait, never mind. Looks like it's got those too. Are you not yet convinced this is a game you gotta play? It's not just a shame, but downright criminal that a beat 'em up this good hasn't seen the light of day outside of arcades. So add Guardian, Denjin Makai 2 to your list, and even better if you have a friend to join in. It just doesn't get much better than this. What do you get when you cross Messiah's Assault Suit Vulcan with Data East's own Atomic Runner Chelnov, and add a hint of Boogie Wings for flavor, Roga Armor Force, or Wolf Fang by those crazy cats at Data East? A mech action shooting bonanza that's not any one thing, but a weird mix of everything. How you play the game partly comes down to how you customize your mech at the start, which you can edit yourself and pick a special weapon, your close range attack, and your mobility, which trades off speed for jump height. There's a bunch of customization, yet it's super easy to understand and choose a loadout. With all the options, you'd think that it'd be complex to control, but it's not the case at all. Instead, it opts for straightforward, hectic arcade action, all to a banging soundtrack that'll remind you of Vapor Trail, the spiritual predecessor of Wolf Fang. That's right, That old arcade and Mega Drive shooter was the prequel, despite the games being nothing alike. But if you're a fan of the first, you'll spot plenty of story and design homages throughout. Though you're fast and agile, you're still a big-ass tank of a mech, so dodging the onslaught of fast enemies and bullets while stuck to the ground isn't always possible. If your build can jump high, you'll be slower on the ground, or vice versa if you have wheels and a limited jump, so your strategy changes accordingly. But the name of the game is screen position and using your arsenal for crowd control, or you'll quickly get bombarded with way too much to dodge. You either shoot forward or at an angle, so you're constantly shifting your screen position to line up enemies flying in from both sides. But it's when they get up close where it really gets fun, unleashing your close range attack in their face for big point blank damage. In fact, part of the strategy is taking the initiative and getting in their face for quick kills before they can respond. The great part is your mech is beefy and doesn't just take damage on contact unless it's bullets, letting you ram and bounce all over enemies on the ground, just like in the later released Boogie Wings and its vehicles. So the real fun in this game, at least for me, is bullying your way around the screen, slicing and dicing up close with the powerful blade, and even jumping to take some out in the air. And it's all done with just 2 buttons, attack and jump, with a third dedicated for your chosen special attack, which by the way is meant to be used constantly and recharges quickly, so it's not just a limited resource, but something to help keep the screen clear and damage tank your foes. On top of that, you get fellow little soldiers to pick up along the way, that sit on your mech and fire away at enemies, even getting knocked off when you get hit, which is pretty cute by the way, but can be picked right back up afterward. And of course you get an energy bar, so you can take a beating. Another one of my favorite parts of the game is yet another concept that was used later in Boogie Wings to fantastic effect, and it's almost just as fun here. When you run out of health, instead of just exploding, you fly out of your mech on a little jetpack and have 1 more life, jumping and boosting around like a little madman. I totally love this part and almost look forward to it when it happens, as you become a smaller target and more maneuverable, while still having some of your firepower and ability. It's so much fun to keep bouncing around all over the place, avoiding death and seeing if you can survive long enough to reach a mech upgrade, where you get your armor back to keep going with a couple life bars. There's something satisfying about wrecking house as a little dude, as much as you did with the mech, and surviving for a long time. I do admit that with the simplicity of controls does come a bit of awkwardness to get used to, and it's those limitations that make the game more challenging. You have to learn your screen positions, how to avoid bullets with a limited jump, and work around the limits of the controls. But once you get the hang of it and aren't struggling against its limits, the game can become a lot of fun. Nowhere is this more true than the short segments throughout levels where you're suddenly given a third dimension, being able to move up and down the screen like a proper shooter, feeling a sense of freedom and how much easier it makes the game during those brief moments, before locking you down to the ground again. Fang also has a lot of longevity, actually having selectable easy versus hard stages to choose from between many of the levels, taking you in different directions. So it'll take multiple playthroughs and branching paths to see everything, on top of trying different loadouts. The game did have a port on both PlayStation and Saturn, and though I've not played either extensively, I have heard that the PSX version plays faster, without any slowdown compared to Saturn. But otherwise, they both have extras like fully voiced story scenes, and an arranged soundtrack option. But if you're going to play the arcade version, beware of the International ROM, which cuts out all the story and stage selection, with every single level strung together. But no matter how you choose to play it or which version, Fang is another underrated and obscure Data East gem, along with games like Boogie Wings that I already showed in my previous arcade exclusives video. The levels are fast and furious, with some cool stage designs and bosses. The customization options are great, the soundtrack is bumping and keeps you pumped, and it's a crazy combo of so many unique elements that come together to make a really fun game, at least if you give it a chance and get used to how it wants you to play. Fang is another winner from Data East in my book. Sideline is hands down the best PC DOS shooter you've never heard of. In fact, it's possibly the best old school DOS shooter ever made, so it's completely nuts the game is barely ever seen or talked about. What's even more crazy is how it was made, by a small group of Taiwanese students that simply gathered together to form a small studio and fulfill their dream of making a game. Most didn't even have experience in making a game before, but they clearly had experience in playing them, as this shooter has serious gameplay chops. While many of us grew up playing games like Tyrion and Raptor on our old PCs that we built from scratch at home, we can all agree they've got a lot more style than substance when it comes to shooting game design, but they've got nothing, absolutely nothing on Sideline when it comes to actual gameplay. Evident the moment you fire this thing up. It plays like your top-of-the-line Japanese arcade-style shooter, and even has top-tier production quality to match. And while it's a really tough game and it'll kick your ass like a good arcade shooter would, it's also much more forgiving and manageable than something like R-Type, thanks to all the conveniences that devs throw your way. Most stages have at least one shield to grab, which will let you take 3 hits before death. Second, you have a host of various weapons, from typical spread shots to lasers, homing beams, and protective orbs, each that you spend powering up a few levels while playing. When you die, while you do lose any options and secondary weapons you grabbed, your main weapon only powers down a level, so you're not stuck with a pea shooter from a single mistake. And there's tons of power-ups and orbs all over the place, with plenty of opportunity to power back up. And unlike most other shooters, your shield and bombs can be used as a get-out-of-jail card, letting you pass through walls and obstacles with a moment of invulnerability, as opposed to being instant death. Don't get the wrong idea though, the game gets tough, and if you're playing with a powered down ship, it'll absolutely chain death your ass until you hit the continue screen. It gives you every opportunity and is very fair, but until you learn the game, it'll still wipe the floor with you. Starting on stage 5 and 6 especially, you'll need a powered up ship, preferably some shield, and a pair of orbs to not get overwhelmed by everything on screen. The orbs are incredibly useful, as they not only block bullets, but can be repositioned in various configurations to help deal extra damage around you. I also get the impression the devs were fans of Toaplan, because the way some of these cycling power-ups bounce around the screen, getting in your way until they're the item you want is just as much of a pain in the ass as it was in something like Fire Shark, especially when this game is very focused around having the right weapon color for certain areas, so you've gotta avoid grabbing the wrong color that could screw up your run. But aside from that, I've got zero complaints about the awesome gameplay on tap. It's the kind of game that once you've played the level a few times and know what's coming, it feels completely natural and a joy to keep the screen under control with the right combination of weapon and screen position. It's as good or better as some of the best old school console shooters that you've ever played, and a gem of a game. The menu even lets you choose your speed, lives, credits, and difficulty, so it's pretty adjustable for various skill levels, and not simply an arcade hard experience. Aside from the top-notch graphics and effects which you clearly see on screen, special mention has to go to the music, which is simply outstanding. How in the hell does a small group like this put out a game with nearly every stage being a banger and making the game a joy to listen to? Are you not yet convinced you need to play this game? But how do you play it? It used to be a pain in the ass because it required a ton of configuration with DOSBox, a command line emulator. But now, thanks to awesome people in the community like Bare Knuckle Rude and Quake Doom Nukem, it's never been easier to make this incredibly obscure game work. The Free Shmups Wiki, which I highlighted in my Best Free Shmups video, has a link to download a single package file that's practically ready to go. Just map your controller of choice with something like Joy-to-Key and run the game. And if you're looking for a history and complete game guide and walkthrough, please check out the links in my description to Bare Knuckle Rue's channel and guide. Not only a 4-loop playthrough of the game, but everything you could possibly want to know about its mechanics and scoring. He was kind enough to let me use some of his footage for this preview, but what he's done to help champion this great game is a real service to the community. If you own a halfway decent computer and love a good shooting game, you owe it to yourself to play Sideline. Play it for yourself and see what a dedicated team of enthusiasts and a love for STGs were able to do. Great graphics and effects, fantastic soundtrack, and top-notch gameplay. That's it's not nearly as punishing as some of the other genre greats. Sideline deserves to be played by all fans of the genre. Ever wonder what you'd get if you mixed SmashTV with pinball? No, probably not. But Data East, those wacky bastards and their wacky games. They did, and in '92 came out with one of the coolest, not quite twin-stick shooters out there that time forgot. Not quite, because it actually controls more like Mercs. You face the direction you run, no strafing. And yeah, visually down to the announcer, it rips off SmashTV pretty big time, only without the gore. But the gameplay is 100% unique, and there's nothing else quite like it. Imagine every stage is like a new pinball machine, with various themes from football to horror to aliens. And the levels are laid out like one too, with ramps and holes and bonus letters to knock out. So the objective isn't just kill everything on screen, but scoring takes on a whole new dimension. When shot, basic enemies fall down and can be rolled into holes and spinners for score, bounced off letter blocks, and more. You too can turn into a ball yourself, with an item, and bounce around the screen for score and damage. Of course, plenty of weapons, power-ups, and hidden secrets to uncover. It's like 2 games in one and all the madness you'd expect, especially I imagine in multiplayer. The game looks great with a screen full of animation and flash, and every level with its own variety of enemies and obstacles. You'll get the basic enemies dressed up in different outfits, based on the level and theme, which is cute. And the levels are always pushing you forward and never drag. Bonus areas show up with various challenges, and you're not only rewarded with big points, but alternate paths as well. You can play the game like a typical run and gun and ignore the scoring. But once you get the hang of it, playing with all these extra mechanics and scoring bonuses opens up a ton of replay value. And because it's so short, it's easy to replay on a whim anytime you have a free 20 to 30 minutes to spare. Definitely one of those games that's simply fun and easy to play, but you can spend a lot of time to master. And if you score high enough at the end, you somehow end up President of the United States. They're pretty much just letting anyone into the Oval Office now, aren't they? It's not the best run and gun you've played, nor the best pinball game, but it's definitely the best run and gun pinball. It was obscure for decades until it finally got a release on Switch as part of Johnny Turbo's arcade, which is great news, as now you can pick it up officially and even play it on the go or with friends more easily. But even with a modern release, it's flown under the radar and is still pretty unknown. Love Konami shooters and Gradius, and never played Space Manbo? Then consider it the best Konami shooter you've never played. Actually, consider it one of the best 8-bit era shooters ever made, really. How can such a good Konami shooter fly under the radar? Well, it didn't. At least if you lived in Japan or Europe, where the MSX computer was a huge seller. But for Yanks like me that grew up in the West, we all missed out on some great games. And Space Manbo is pretty great. It's got everything you'd expect from an early Konami shooter, as it released just after Gradius 2, when Konami was in their prime, releasing their best work. Great visuals and effects that surpassed most any other MSX game at the time, and pushed the computer past its limits. And as impressive as it was, with smoother scrolling and parallax backgrounds than most any other MSX game, it did hit its limitations with slowdown. But lucky for us, there's now a turbo hack that gets the game playing full speed and even smoother, which is what you're seeing here. And though it does make the game harder without slowdown, it's worth checking out as it's still very playable this way, or at least until you get blue-balled toward the end of the game. The soundtrack is also fantastic, and on par with some of their best work. Consistently catchy and memorable on nearly every level. While the gameplay does feel very much like Gradius, it differs quite a bit in terms of mechanics. Here, your Space Mambo, purposefully meant to look like a mambo fish, has a set of directional options. You can switch between forward, vertical, or rear firing, and will need to, as that's a key element of the gameplay. Your weapon is either a needle shot or a spread wave, and a missile pickup rounds out the arsenal. No power-up system like in Gradius. Instead, you have a very long power gauge that doesn't reset when you die, but it does slowly drain over time, forcing you to keep powering up as you play and not get complacent. Space Mambo really is all the good and all the bad that comes with Konami's early shooters. It's still very easy to die on walls and obstacles by accident, especially when there are so many tight spaces to squeeze through. And the checkpoint system here puts you way back after death. If you die on a boss, expect to get sent halfway back into the level and do it all again. A good thing in that it gives you plenty of time to speed up and power up again with options. So the Gradius syndrome is minimal, with every checkpoint being quite recoverable as long as you can keep your overall power level decent. But it's also a huge pain in the butt, dying in a particular hard boss to learn, then having to redo half the level over again. That's never more true than the pain in the ass Stage 7 boss, and its ricocheting blue balls of despair, which when played with the turbo hack, is kind of overwhelming, and it'll have you redoing most of the level over and over, just to get teabagged again. Thus the despair. Now I do think that some get a wee bit overzealous proclaiming Space Mambo to be the greatest 8-bit shooter of all time, or even the best from Konami. I still prefer some of their early Gradius games myself, and it's got those few early warts that make it less friendly to newcomers, like the spaced out checkpoints. But really, when was any early Gradius all that friendly to newcomers? But Space Mambo has all the ingredients that make Konami shooters great, and the fact it's even mentioned in the same breath as their other great games is reason enough to get intrigued and play it. From the outstanding graphics work and incredible music to the classic feel of the gameplay, it should be on any Konami fan's list to play. If you love old school horizontal shooters like Space Mambo, but find most way too difficult to fully enjoy, then Over Horizon is the game you're looking for. Literally one of the best 8-bit shooters around, this time on the NES. It gets everything right, yet can be enjoyed by even entry-level players. Developed by relatively unknown Hotbeat, someone on that team was clearly a pro at getting the most out of the hardware. Backgrounds and sprite work are gorgeous for the NES, with levels feeling alive and occasional slowdown never really hampering the gameplay. Organic stages with undulating tentacles, mechanical stages with moving gears and parts. It's about as good as NES games have ever looked. That extends to the fantastic soundtrack. If you're a fan of 8-bit chiptunes like I am, then you'll love the music in Over Horizon. The gameplay will remind you of Space Mambo, with a set of options that rotate and allow you to fire in various directions. But unlike that game, where your main shot was pretty minuscule and weak, forcing you to aim and maneuver constantly, Over Horizon makes it much easier. It has an awesome weapon and option edit screen at the start. The first lets you assign points to your weapon of choice, including a powerful homing weapon that'll make the game a good bit easier for novices. The second screen lets you assign your 2 option positions and where you want them to swap, so you can experiment with various loadouts and configs until you find a favorite. But whether you have options or not, your ship immediately starts with the ability to fire both forward and backward from the get-go. The checkpoints are regular and the ability to recover is always fair. And despite there being plenty of environmental obstacles to learn and memorize, the ability to adjust your ship speed with the select button on the fly makes it far less frustrating to maneuver the tight spaces, at least once you practice and know how to navigate each area. The developers clearly took the most frustrating aspects for most shooting game novices, like death on walls or the inability to fire in the direction you need, and made sure that it wasn't much of an issue. NES games in particular were known for being absolutely brutal and often quite janky, but Over Horizon is a top-tier production in every way. Sometimes it feels like you're playing another Gradius, and other times another R-Type, but it's never as difficult as either. Hot B went on to make Steel Empire for the Mega Drive, another great shooter that also flew under the radar, but Over Horizon is exceptionally rare, often selling in physical form for 3 figures. If you're an NES kid like I was and grew up with one, or just a fan of 8-bit shooters like this, even if you're a skilled player and will finish it without much effort, it's absolutely a must-play. Over Horizon has my wholehearted recommendation as one of the best kept secrets of the Famicom. Unless you lived in Japan during the 80s and early 90s, you likely never owned a PC-88 or 98 computer by NEC, but they were huge, owning a majority of the market for some time, which meant they got a ton of games. That's where the name PC Engine came from, a play on the PC series of NEC computers. So it's no surprise that most of us missed out on the incredible PC-98 exclusive Flame Zapper Kotsujin. Easily the baddest shooter on the system. One look at the game tells you these guys were fans of Truxton. Even the ship looks like a skull bomb, and you'll see a whole lot of familiar designs. But Flame Zapper is no Truxton clone, borrowing heavily from other games like Rayforce, and even some Danmaku elements thrown in. Almost a V5-like gameplay experience, where it feels like an old-school shooter with a mix of modern elements thrown in, which makes sense as it was a late release in '96, well after all the games it homages. The weapons are bold and flashy, and the bombs even more so, whether homaging the homing laser from Raiden, the Tatsujin bomb, or the awesome screen-filling beams of death. Each weapon has its own unique bomb attack, and they're all spectacular. You build up a meter as you play, which when filled grants you a shield, and bonus points thereafter as you fill it again. The stages are fast-moving and dense, and the music, like any shooting game worth its salt, is equally spectacular on every single level of the game. For a PC-98 game, it was stunning in presentation, and still holds up. Another great aspect of the game is it's super accessible on normal mode, a game that many experienced players will clear on a credit pretty quickly, but novices can also enjoy and finish, with the handful of credits given on the first playthrough. But once you move up to the hard and very hard modes, the game gets serious and presents an excellent challenge, which makes it a great game for novices and veterans alike. But that's not all, as the devs were clearly fans of the caravan shooting style of game, and included some score attack modes of their own. While it doesn't have any destructible environments, it's still a super dense onslaught of enemies that need to be speed killed for max score, along with harder difficulties also available. And of course, the necessary memorable music track to go along with it. Flame Zapper isn't completely obscure, being known in shoot-'em-up circles as a kick-ass shooter of its day, at least enough to where the developers of Zero Ranger named it as one of their inspirations, along with classics like Chorensha and Ikaruga. That's some pretty good company. So yes, you need to play some Flame Zapper. It's the unsung hero of the PC-98, and a mid-90s shooter that easily stands up to some of the best arcade releases of the time. A small team of 2 people showing the big boys how it's done, and making a game that deserves to be played over 2 decades later. Alright, I admit it, nothing about Aliens is obscure. The cabinet was super popular in the early 90s. How can Aliens plus Konami of the 90s not equal awesome? Everyone rants and raves about Capcom's excellent Aliens vs Predator, and rightfully so. But back in 1990, we were playing the Aliens arcade game. And if you're younger than 40, probably never played yourself, because after its popular arcade run, it just disappeared. Never saw a single home release of any kind outside arcades. The movie in '87 was way intense for my 10-year-old self. I loved it, but it also gave me nightmares. And yet, couldn't stay away. By the time I hit 13 though, in 1990, and saw an Aliens cabinet with a Konami logo, I nearly lost my shit. They could just take my money and I'd find a way to get more. And to this day, it still holds up as the Aliens game that captures the energy, atmosphere, creepiness, and straight up badassness of the movie. Every stage looks and feels like something that belongs in the film. From claustrophobic corridors, labyrinthine steel walkways in the sky, an elevator shaft as aliens slowly break away the cables above, and just awesome detail in the backgrounds of the base, destroyed and overgrown with alien architecture. Trapped humans from the base, stuck to the walls with their chests either bloody or ready to burst. It's all here. It doesn't necessarily stick to the movie, but everything you'd expect from a good Aliens game is here. From the facehuggers to all forms of xenomorphs, including all new creations for some of the bosses to make things interesting. Though what zombies are doing in an Aliens game, I don't know. The music is driving intense. Either hyping you up to fry some alien ass, or making you feel overwhelmed in later stages with the odds stacked against you. And the ever-present alerts giving it a sense of urgency. And the various aliens scream and squeal as they fry or explode. It all comes together into a great oral experience that matches the creativity of the levels and creates the right atmosphere. I'll never forget the opening stage boss that shifts to a vertical shooter as it lunges out of the tunnel and has you dodging its blasts, getting faster and faster until you fry its alien ass, only to then stay in that perspective for stage 2. Come on! As you speed through the base in a shooting gallery segment. The gameplay is hard to describe, as it's not a beat-em-up, nor really a traditional run-and-gun or a platformer, nor is it a shoot-em-up. Kind of a walk-and-shoot, beat-em-up style game, where it's all about crowd management, screen position, and keeping the aliens torched before they overwhelm the screen. And I do mean torched, as the flamethrower is definitely the coolest weapon in the game, as it should be. And it's not a proper Aliens game without a power loader to pilot, even if it's a bit harder to use than just blowing them away with your gun. One of the perks of living in LA was visiting James Cameron's studio a few years back and getting to see some of those props up close, like the giant alien queen and the power loader itself, the actual life-size props used during filming. Needless to say, that was a pretty awesome trip. Aliens truly feels like a descent into madness and captures the spirit of the films. The perfect combo of horror and action, something that Capcom's Brawler, as good as it is, doesn't do. AVP is simply a kick-ass beat-em-up with predators and aliens. Konami's Aliens is an actual trip through the movie, and it kicks all sorts of ass. It's not obscure, as most know of the game somehow, but for most, it's a game they simply never had a way to play. Aliens is meant to be played on a big screen with the sound turned up, just like the movie, so emulating it on a small PC monitor doesn't do it justice. But if you've got the setup, you can get a glimpse of how awesome it was to play on a big cabinet in 1990.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Ultinex Second is the latest game in a trilogy of what's possibly the best set of DOUJIN shmups ever made, so it's not nearly as obscure as some of the other games on this list, but you'd be amazed how few people, even those who love shoot-em-ups, haven't heard of it. DOUJIN shmup, meaning an unlicensed, fan-made game by a small group of indie devs, and the Ultinex trilogy by Sitter Skane shows the big boys how it's done, with gameplay that'll immediately remind you of classics like Rayforce and Radiant Silvergun. Each of the three games focuses on a certain mechanic, with the first, Kamui, being mostly like Rayforce and its lock-on mechanic. The second game, Reflex, changes things up with absorption, constantly playing with offense versus defense to survive otherwise impossible odds. And Ultinex Second, the first in terms of story sequence, but final game released, is all about aggressive, point-blank play using a powerful sword a la Radiant Silvergun, although the original Altenex, released back in '97, was actually before Treasure's game, so who copied who exactly? And for a small indie team, Altenex looks and sounds great, visually on par with a typical PS2-era 3D game, only aside from Gradius 5, the PS2 really didn't have many other shmups this good. While the polygons and textures may be simple, the art direction isn't, with scenery and angles constantly shifting, enemies swooping in from the background, and bosses morphing from one phase to another in style. The soundtrack should impress most who pick it up. From stage to stage, it holds its own with some of the better games in the genre and elevates the presentation to something you want to experience across multiple playthroughs. Aside from the presentation, regardless of what you may think of 2.5D space shooters like this or the awesome Eschatos, the reason this trilogy is so well regarded is the fantastic gameplay and depth on tap. Altenex is a constant dance between taking out small popcorn enemies with your main gun, controlling crowds with your homing lasers, and swooping in to unleash a can of whoop-ass with your twin laser swords. They hit for big damage, erase bullets, and even auto-target around you no matter the enemy's location. And learning all the tanky enemies, each of their attack patterns, and how to best dispatch each one will have you playing like a pro after a few tries. Your laser sword has a special attack as well, a powerful heat-seeking beam to quickly take out heavier enemies and disable bosses. Using your main gun or swords is infinite, but either the homing lasers or beam drain your power gauge, which recharges automatically and even faster as you kill enemies and pick up orbs. But as your gauge depletes, so does your gun power, so keeping it on the high side and not overusing them is part of the strategy. It plays very much like Eschatos, one of my all-time favorites, where you're always shifting between offensive and defensive strategies. Altenex second, the entire trilogy really, is also well regarded because of their excellent hard modes and deep systems that allow for massive replay value, made by a small team of 3 enthusiasts who know what makes a great shmup that'll stand the test of time. Which of the 3 games becomes your favorite is up to you, as they all have something distinct to offer, and all are worth playing in any order you choose. All 3 games are now available on Steam, and if you want, as a package for only $10 until the sale ends. So if this looks kick-ass to you, grab them while you can, and discover for yourself why those who know Sitter's game won't stop telling you to play them. These are just a handful of amazing, obscure games out there, and there's so many more that I'd love to show. In fact, if you love these kinds of discovery videos and haven't ever seen my best arcade exclusives, where I highlight incredible games like Cannon Dancer, Boogie Wings, Cyvern, and more, don't miss it, as it ended up one of my all-time most popular videos, and you can check that one out right here.